The Dark Magic of Africa, a terrifying story from Nigeria horror documentary. The world is full of mysteries, stories that travel through generations, stories that begin with a strange event and end with questions that are never answered. Tonight's story begins in an unexpected place, not in a remote village, not deep inside a forest, but in the modern city of Dubai, a city of lights, skyscrapers, and endless movement. But one quiet evening, in a small corner of the city, a conversation revealed a story that would stay in memory forever. A story about a village in Nigeria, a mysterious traveler, a hidden wooden box, and a mystery that still remains unsolved. It was a quiet evening in Dubai. The air was calm, and the city lights were slowly turning on as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. I was sitting with a friend near the Dubai-Sharjah border. His name was Bobby. Bobby was originally from Nigeria, a country in West Africa known for its rich culture, deep traditions, and mysterious stories that many outsiders have never heard. We had been talking for hours. Life, business, family, normal things. But then suddenly, Bobby said something that caught my attention. He looked at me and asked quietly, "Have you ever heard about African black magic?" At first I thought he was joking, but the expression on his face was serious. Very serious. That night, Bobby shared a story that I will never forget. And according to him, this story was not just a myth. It was something that actually happened in his village many years ago. The belief in spiritual forces. Before telling the story, Bobby explained something important. In many parts of West Africa, especially in rural communities, people strongly believe in spiritual forces. These beliefs have existed for centuries. Some communities believe that certain individuals possess knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge about spiritual rituals, ancient traditions, and unseen forces. Whether people believe it or not, these stories are deeply rooted in local culture. And Bobby grew up hearing many of them. But one particular event changed the way he looked at these things forever. A strange conflict. The story begins in Nigeria during the late 1980s. At that time, tensions between different ethnic groups in certain regions were very high. Disagreements between communities sometimes led to serious conflicts. And in places where modern systems were weak, many people believed that spiritual powers could influence real-world events. According to Bobby, villagers began noticing strange occurrences. Healthy people suddenly became extremely sick. Some people reported terrifying dreams that felt disturbingly real. Others claimed they saw shadows moving in places where no one should have been. Fear slowly spread throughout the village. No one could explain what was happening. The mysterious illness. One morning, the village woke up to shocking news. Several people had fallen seriously ill overnight. They were weak, confused, and unable to explain what they were experiencing. Local doctors could not find any clear medical explanation. Days passed. More people became sick. The village began to panic. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed it was a disease. Others believed something far more mysterious was happening. Eventually, the elders of the village decided to seek help from someone known for understanding traditional spiritual practices. The arrival of the elder. An elderly man arrived from a nearby region. He was known as someone wise, a person who understood both tradition and human nature. When he reached the village, he didn't immediately take action. Instead, he listened. For hours he spoke with villagers, hearing every detail of what had happened. After observing the situation carefully, he told the villagers something simple. "Fear spreads faster than truth," he said. "But every problem has a cause. For several days he stayed in the village, quietly studying the situation. Then one evening, he gathered the villagers together. He asked them to stay calm and avoid spreading rumors. That night something strange happened. Villagers later claimed the wind became unusually strong. Some said they saw lights in the distance. Others heard sounds they could not explain. But by the next morning, something had changed. The number of sick people stopped increasing. Slowly, people began recovering. Within days, the strange wave of illness disappeared. What really happened? No one ever confirmed exactly what caused the events in that village. Some believed the elder had discovered the truth and solved the problem. Others believed fear and rumors had made the situation worse than it really was. But Bobby told me something interesting. He said that stories like this are common across many African regions. Some are based on real events. Others grow through generations of storytelling. But they all reflect something deeper, the powerful role that belief, culture, and fear can play in human societies. A story that stayed with me. When Bobby finished telling the story, the night in Dubai had become very quiet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights reflected off the empty road beside us. Finally, Bobby smiled and said, "Whether people believe in these things or not, Africa is full of mysteries." And maybe he was right. Because even today, there are still stories around the world that science cannot fully explain. Stories that live somewhere between history, belief, and the unknown. Part 2: The Village That Lived in Fear. After hearing Bobby's story that night in Dubai, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the way he told it felt different. It didn't sound like a normal ghost story. It sounded like something that had actually happened. So I asked him another question. What happened to the village after that? Bobby looked at me for a moment. Then he slowly continued the story. The village that refused to sleep. After the strange illness spread through the village, life changed overnight. People stopped going out after dark. Children were told to stay inside. And every night the same fear returned. Some villagers claimed they heard strange sounds in the distance. Others said they felt like someone was watching them. Even the bravest people in the village started becoming nervous. The most disturbing part was that nobody knew what was causing it. And when people fear something they cannot understand, their imagination can become even more dangerous. Rumors begin to spread. Soon, rumors began spreading through the village. Some people believed the sickness and strange events were connected to an old conflict between communities. Others believed someone was trying to harm the village using unknown forces. But there was no proof. Only fear. And fear has a way of growing quickly. Some villagers even claimed they saw shadows moving across empty fields late at night. But when they went closer, there was nothing there. The night of the storm. One night a powerful storm hit the region. The wind was stronger than usual. Thunder echoed across the sky. The entire village stayed awake. Some families prayed. Others sat silently inside their homes, waiting for the storm to pass. But in the middle of the night, something strange happened. Several villagers later said they saw flashes of light near the edge of the forest. At first, they thought it was lightning. But the lights didn't move like lightning. They stayed in the same place for several seconds, then disappeared. No one dared to go investigate. A terrifying discovery. The next morning, a group of farmers went to their fields as usual. But when they reached the edge of the village, they noticed something unusual. The ground looked disturbed, as if someone had been digging during the night. The farmers became suspicious. They called the village elders. Soon a small crowd gathered around the site. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. But the elders made a decision. They told everyone to remain calm. Jumping to conclusions would only create more fear. Still, the mystery remained. Who had been there during the storm? And why? The elders' final advice. The elderly man who had been helping the village gathered everyone once again. This time his message was very clear. He told the villagers something important. Sometimes fear becomes stronger than reality, he said. If we allow fear to control us, we become our own worst enemy. He encouraged the villagers to stay united, to avoid spreading rumors, and to focus on rebuilding normal life. Slowly, the village began returning to its daily routines. The strange illness faded away. The frightening rumors stopped spreading. And within weeks, things began feeling normal again. But one question remained. Years later, Bobby said people still talk about those events. Some believe the village was targeted by someone using mysterious traditions. Others believe it was simply a combination of fear, coincidence, and misunderstanding. But nobody ever discovered the full truth. And maybe that's what makes the story so haunting. Because sometimes, the most frightening mysteries are the ones that are never fully explained. Bobby's final words. When Bobby finished telling the story, the night had grown very quiet. The streets around us were almost empty. I asked him one final question. Do you believe those things were real? Bobby smiled slightly. Then he said something I still remember clearly. In Africa, he said, there are many stories that live between belief and reality. And sometimes the truth is somewhere in the middle. If you enjoyed this story, remember that the world is full of mysteries. Some explained by science, others still waiting to be understood. And maybe some stories are meant to remain mysterious forever. Part 3: The Secret Behind the Fear. By the time Bobby finished the second part of his story, the night in Dubai had become completely silent. The traffic had disappeared. Only the sound of distant wind moved through the empty streets. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. But there was still something that didn't make sense. If the village had returned to normal, why did Bobby still remember the story so clearly? So I asked him, did everything really end there? Bobby slowly shook his head. No, he said. That was only the beginning. A hidden truth. According to Bobby, a few weeks after the strange events stopped, something unexpected happened. A traveler arrived in the village. He wasn't from that region, and he wasn't someone the villagers had seen before. He claimed he was passing through on his way to another town. But the village elders noticed something unusual. The man seemed to know details about the strange events that had happened in the village. Details that outsiders shouldn't have known. At first, the villagers thought it was just coincidence. But the elders weren't convinced. They quietly began asking questions. A suspicious stranger. The traveler stayed in the village for several days. During that time, people noticed he spent a lot of time near the forest outside the village. The same forest where villagers had reported strange lights during the stormy night. One evening, a group of young men decided to follow him. They didn't want to cause trouble. They just wanted to understand why the stranger was so interested in that area. So they waited until sunset. And when the man left the village again, they followed him from a distance. What they saw. The stranger walked deep into the forest, farther than most villagers normally went. Finally, he stopped in a clearing. The young men hid behind trees, watching carefully. What they saw next confused them. The man began digging in the ground. It wasn't random. It looked like he knew exactly where to dig. After several minutes, He pulled something out of the soil. The young men couldn't see clearly what it was, but it looked like a small wooden box. The stranger opened the box. He stared at its contents for a long moment. Then he closed it again and buried it back in the same place. After that, he simply walked away. The village investigation. The next morning, the young men told the elders what they had seen. Now the elders were certain something strange was happening, so they decided to investigate the location themselves. A small group walked into the forest. They found the exact place the young men described, and after digging for a few minutes, they discovered the buried wooden box. The elders carefully opened it. Inside the box were several objects wrapped in cloth. No one in the village could immediately explain what they meant, but the discovery confirmed one thing. Someone had intentionally hidden something in that forest. The stranger disappears. The elders wanted to question the traveler, but when they returned to the village, he was gone. No one had seen him leave. His belongings were gone as well. It was as if he had disappeared overnight. The villagers never saw him again. The mystery remains. After that day, no more strange events happened in the village. No more mysterious illnesses. No more strange lights in the forest. Life slowly returned to normal. But the villagers never forgot what had happened, and no one ever discovered who the traveler really was, or why that box had been buried in the forest. Bobby's final thought. When Bobby finished telling me this part of the story, he looked out toward the empty road. Then he said something that stayed in my mind. Sometimes, he said, the scariest stories are not about what we know. They're about what we never discover. And maybe he was right, because even today, there are places in the world where mysteries remain unsolved. Stories that live somewhere between truth, legend, and the unknown. Part 4, The Truth That Was Never Revealed. After Bobby finished the third part of his story, the silence between us felt heavier than before. The streetlights reflected off the road, and the city of Dubai seemed unusually quiet. I kept thinking about the traveler. Who was he? Why had he buried that box in the forest? And most importantly, what was inside it? So I asked Bobby the question that had been on my mind. Did the villagers ever find out what those objects meant? Bobby paused for a moment. Then he slowly shook his head. Not completely, he said. But something happened after that. The elders' final decision. After discovering the mysterious wooden box in the forest, the village elders held a meeting. They knew the situation could easily create panic if the wrong rumors spread. So they decided to keep the discovery secret. Only a few trusted members of the village were allowed to see the objects inside the box. According to Bobby, the items looked old. Very old. Some appeared handmade. Others looked like they belonged to ancient traditions that few people still practiced. The elders carefully wrapped the objects again and decided to remove them from the forest. But instead of destroying them, they chose another solution. They believed some mysteries were better handled quietly. The night the box was gone. That same night, the elders gathered in a small group. They took the wooden box far away from the village, far beyond the fields and forests where villagers usually traveled. No one knows exactly where they left it, and the elders never spoke publicly about what they did with it. But after that night, something strange happened. Everything became normal. For the first time in weeks, the village felt peaceful. No more strange dreams. No more unexplained illnesses. No more rumors about shadows in the fields. Even the forest seemed quiet again. Slowly, life returned to normal. Children played outside. Farmers returned to their fields. and the fear that once filled the village slowly disappeared. But one mystery remained. The traveler who buried the box was never seen again. Not in that village. Not in the surrounding towns. It was as if he had vanished. Years later, many years passed. New generations grew up in the village, and the strange events slowly became just another story told by elders during long evenings. Some people believed the traveler had been responsible for the fear that spread through the village. Others believed he was trying to stop something worse. But the truth was never confirmed. Back in Dubai, when Bobby finished telling the story, he leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. "Do you know what the strange part is?" he asked. "What?" I replied. Bobby looked at the city lights in the distance. "The world is full of stories like this," he said. "Stories where nobody ever finds the full answer." Then he added one last sentence. "And sometimes, the mystery itself becomes the story." A final thought. Stories like this exist in many cultures around the world. Some are based on real events. Some grow through generations of storytelling. But they all remind us of something important. Human history is full of mysteries. And even today, there are still stories waiting to be understood. Part 5, the story that refused to die. Even after Bobby finished the story, something about it stayed with me. That night in Dubai, the city lights felt different. Maybe it was just the atmosphere. Or maybe it was the idea that somewhere in the world, there are places where stories like this still exist. Places where mystery is part of everyday life. But before we left that night, Bobby told me one final thing. Something he had never mentioned before. A memory from his childhood. Bobby said that when he was a child, the elders of his village used to repeat a warning. It was something they told every generation. Respect the unknown. At the time, Bobby didn't understand what they meant. To a child, the world feels simple. But after the strange events in the village, those words began to make sense. Because sometimes, what people fear is not just superstition. Sometimes it's the memory of something they once experienced. Something they could never fully explain. The forest that no one visits. Even years after the mysterious traveler disappeared, the forest near the village kept its reputation. People still avoided going there at night. Not because they believed something terrible would happen, but because of the stories connected to that place. Stories passed down from parents to children. Stories about lights seen between the trees. About strange sounds heard in the distance. No one ever confirmed these stories. But they never completely disappeared either. A story that became legend. Over time, the events in Bobby's village became part of local folklore. Some people believed the traveler had been involved in something dangerous. Others believed he was trying to stop something that had already begun. But because the truth was never fully revealed, the story slowly changed with every retelling. Like many legends around the world, the mystery became part of the culture itself. Why stories like this matter? As Bobby explained, Africa is a continent filled with history. Thousands of cultures, thousands of traditions, and thousands of stories that outsiders rarely hear. Some are about heroes, some are about survival, and some, like this one, live somewhere between reality and mystery. Whether someone believes the events were supernatural or not isn't really the point. Because sometimes the power of a story lies in the question it leaves behind. One final question. Before we said goodbye that night, I asked Bobby something. "If you could go back," I said, "would you want to know the full truth?" Bobby thought about it for a moment. Then he smiled. "Maybe not," he said, "because some mysteries are better left unsolved." The world is full of mysteries. And maybe he was right, because across the world, there are countless stories just like this one. Stories passed down through generations. Stories that begin with a strange event and end without a clear explanation. And sometimes, the most powerful stories are not the ones that give answers. They are the ones that leave us wondering. Part 6: The Legacy of the Mystery. Years passed after the strange events in Bobby's village. Life continued as it always does. Children grew up. Families moved on. And the village slowly changed with time. But the story never disappeared. Even decades later, people still remembered those strange weeks when fear spread through the village. A new generation. By the time Bobby became an adult, a new generation had grown up hearing the story. To them, it sounded almost like a legend, something mysterious that happened long ago. But for the older villagers, it was not just a legend. They remembered the fear. They remembered the sleepless nights. And they remembered the traveler who arrived and disappeared without explanation. Those memories kept the story alive. The forest today. According to Bobby, the forest near the village still exists today. It looks peaceful, quiet, just another natural landscape. But for the villagers, that forest will always carry a different meaning. Because it was the place where the mysterious box was buried. The place connected to the strangest events in their history. Even today, many villagers prefer not to walk there alone at night. Not because they believe something dangerous is waiting, but because the memory of the story still lingers. The power of stories. When Bobby told me all of this, he explained something interesting. Stories like this are not unusual in many parts of the world. Every culture has them. Stories about mysterious travelers. Stories about unexplained events. Stories that blur the line between fact and folklore. And over time, those stories become part of the identity of a place. They become something people remember, even when the truth is unclear. Why we tell these stories? At the end of the night, Bobby said something that made a lot of sense. He said that stories like this survive for a reason. Not because people want to be afraid, but because they remind us how little we truly know about the world. Even in modern times, there are still mysteries that remain unsolved. And maybe that's part of what makes life interesting. A final reflection. When I left that night, the streets of Dubai were almost empty. But Bobby's story stayed in my mind. Because it wasn't just a horror story. It was a reminder that every place on Earth has its own mysteries. Some are explained by science. Some are explained by history. And some remain unexplained forever. Part 7: The Questions That Never Disappeared. Even after everything Bobby told me that night, one thing kept bothering me. The story had many details, many events, many witnesses. But it also had something else. Questions. Questions that nobody in the village could ever answer. And sometimes, unanswered questions can be more powerful than the story itself. The identity of the traveler. One of the biggest mysteries was the traveler who appeared in the village. Where did he come from? Why did he know so much about the strange events happening there? And why did he disappear the moment the wooden box was discovered? The villagers searched nearby towns for information. But nobody recognized his description. No one had seen him traveling through the region before. It was almost as if he appeared only for that moment in history. And then vanished. The objects inside the box. Another mystery remained hidden inside that wooden box. Only a few elders had seen the objects clearly. And they never publicly explained what they believed those items represented. Some villagers believed the objects were connected to ancient traditions. Others believed they were nothing more than symbolic artifacts. But because the elders kept the details private, speculation continued for years. And sometimes, when people do not know the truth, imagination fills the empty space. A village divided by belief. Years later, when people talked about the story, two different opinions usually appeared. Some villagers believed the entire event had a logical explanation. They believed fear, rumors, and coincidence created a situation that felt supernatural. Others believed something deeper had happened, something connected to traditions and beliefs that outsiders might never fully understand. Neither side could prove their view completely. So the mystery remained. The story travels beyond the village. As time passed, the story spread beyond the village. Travelers heard it. Nearby communities talked about it. Eventually, the story became part of regional folklore. Different people began telling it in slightly different ways. Some versions made the events sound even more mysterious. Others tried to explain them more logically. But every version kept one thing the same: the traveler and the wooden box hidden in the forest. Back to that night in Dubai. When Bobby finished explaining all of this, he looked thoughtful, almost nostalgic. He told me that even today, when he visits his home country, people still remember the story. Not because it was frightening, but because it was never fully solved. And humans have always been fascinated by mysteries. Why mysteries stay with us. Before we said goodbye that night, Bobby shared one final thought. He said the reason stories like this survive for generations is simple. Humans naturally search for answers. But when an answer never appears, the story becomes even more powerful. Because every new generation tries to understand it again. The mystery continues. Even today, somewhere in Nigeria, that village still exists. The forest still stands. And the story still lives in the memories of those who heard it. Maybe one day someone will discover the full truth. Or maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Part 8: The Mystery That Still Lives. After hearing Bobby's entire story that night, one thing became clear. This was not just a story about a village. It was a story about mystery, about the unknown, and about how certain events can leave questions that remain unanswered for decades. Even today, long after those strange events happened, the story continues to live in the memories of the people who heard it. The village today. According to Bobby, the village today looks very different from what it was years ago. New houses have been built. New roads connect the area to nearby towns. Technology has reached even the rural parts of the region. But despite all the modern changes, the story of that mysterious traveler is still remembered. Older villagers still tell the story during long evening conversations. Not as something to scare people, but as something that once happened and was never fully explained. A place full of questions. The forest where the wooden box was buried still exists. Trees have grown taller. Paths have changed. But the place remains part of the village's history. Some people say nothing unusual ever happened there again. Others claim they still feel a strange silence when they walk through that area. Of course, these stories are impossible to prove. But that is how legends survive. When stories become history. Over time, the events that happened in Bobby's village became something more than just a story. They became part of the community's identity. A reminder of a strange period when fear and mystery surrounded the village. And like many stories passed down through generations, the details slowly changed. But the core of the story remained the same. A mysterious traveler, a hidden wooden box, and a truth that no one ever fully discovered. Back to that night. As Bobby finished speaking, the night in Dubai had grown very late. The streets were quiet. The city lights reflected across the empty road. For a moment, we both sat in silence. Then Bobby said something simple. Every place in the world has stories like this. Stories that are never completely solved. Stories that stay alive because people keep asking the same question. What really happened? The final thought. Maybe the events in that village had a logical explanation. Maybe fear and coincidence created something that seemed mysterious. Or maybe something truly unusual happened during those weeks long ago. The truth may never be known. And perhaps that is why the story continues to be told. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that leave us wondering. The end, or maybe not. Even today, somewhere in Nigeria, that village still stands. The forest still grows. And the story still exists in the memories of those who remember it. A story about mystery, about belief, and about how some questions remain unanswered. Forever. Part 9, Searching for the Truth. Even after Bobby's story ended, the mystery refused to leave my mind. The traveler, the wooden box, the strange illness that suddenly appeared and then disappeared just as quickly. It felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. And like many mysteries in history, the more you think about it, the more questions appear. Could there be a logical explanation? Some people who hear stories like this immediately look for logical explanations. They believe that every mystery has a scientific answer. Perhaps the illness in the village was caused by something environmental. A contaminated water source, a temporary infection, or maybe the fear itself caused people to feel sick. Psychologists often explain how fear and stress can affect entire communities. When people believe something dangerous is happening, the human mind can create powerful reactions. The power of belief. But there is another side to stories like this. In many cultures, belief plays an important role in how people understand the world. For centuries, communities across the world have used traditions and spiritual explanations to interpret events they could not explain scientifically. And these traditions are often deeply connected to culture and identity. For the villagers in Bobby's story, the mysterious events were not just physical events. They were experiences that challenged their understanding of reality. The role of the traveler. One of the most puzzling elements of the story remains the traveler. Who was he? Why did he bury the wooden box in the forest? And why did he disappear without a trace? There are many possible explanations. He could have been someone passing through who became involved in local conflicts. He could have been connected to traditions unfamiliar to outsiders. Or perhaps the villagers misunderstood his actions completely. Without evidence, the answer remains unknown. Why mysteries fascinate us. Stories like this capture our imagination because humans naturally seek explanations. Throughout history, some of the most famous mysteries have remained unsolved for decades or even centuries. And when an event cannot be fully explained, it becomes part of storytelling, part of folklore, part of cultural memory. The mystery itself becomes the reason people continue telling the story. A story that traveled across the world. What makes Bobby's story even more interesting is where it was told. Not in a small village, not in Africa, but in the middle of a modern city thousands of miles away. Dubai, a place filled with technology, skyscrapers, and modern life. Yet even there, stories from distant villages still travel across cultures and borders. Because mystery is universal. The question that remains. As I left that night, one final thought stayed in my mind. Maybe the truth behind the events in Bobby's village was simple. Or maybe it was far more complicated than anyone realized. But until someone discovers real evidence, one question will always remain. What really happened in that village? Final reflection. Perhaps one day someone will find answers. Or maybe the story will continue being told exactly the way it is now. As a mystery, a legend, a reminder that even in our modern world, there are still stories waiting to be understood. And sometimes, the unknown is what makes a story unforgettable. Part 10, The Mystery Lives On. Every story eventually reaches an ending. But some stories do something unusual. Instead of giving answers, they leave behind questions. And the story Bobby told that night was exactly one of those stories. A story that traveled far. What started as a strange event in a small village in Nigeria eventually traveled far beyond its origin. It moved from one generation to another, from one storyteller to the next, until one evening, thousands of miles away in Dubai, Bobby shared the story again. And just like that, the mystery continued its journey. Because stories have a unique power. They travel through time, through cultures, through people who decide to keep them alive. The line between truth and legend. Many years have passed since those strange events happened in the village. But even today, no one has confirmed exactly what caused them. Some believe it was simply a misunderstanding that grew larger over time. Others believe something deeper was involved, something connected to traditions and beliefs that outsiders might never fully understand. But without clear evidence, the story remains suspended between two possibilities: history and legend. Why stories like this matter? Stories like Bobby's remind us that the world is still full of mysteries. Even in a time where technology explains so many things, there are still moments in history that remain unclear. And perhaps that is part of what makes storytelling so powerful. Because stories are not always about proving facts. Sometimes they are about remembering experiences and sharing them with others. The forest, the village, the memory. Somewhere in Nigeria, that village still exists. The forest still stands quietly at the edge of the fields. People continue living their everyday lives. But hidden inside the memory of that place is a strange chapter of its past. A time when fear, mystery, and unanswered questions changed the way the villagers saw their world. A final thought. As Bobby and I left that quiet place in Dubai that night, I realized something. Whether the story was completely true or not almost didn't matter anymore, because the mystery itself had become part of the story. And sometimes, the unknown is what makes a story unforgettable. The end.